Alright, YouTubers, here it is. I'm about to do my actual Revo 2.0 budget build. I want to call it the Tier 1 build for the Revo V1 conversion. I already, in a previous unsuccessful video, tore apart my AKA tank Revo V1 with the RPM A-arms and HR front and rear bulkheads and diff builds. There wasn't anything honestly wrong with it. I just tore the thing completely apart to this here video. I did have a video where I tore it apart, but it didn't pan out so well. The camera that I used wasn't of the greatest quality. But here we go. I like to dedicate this video kind of to Jim's Bearings, who's provided bearings for me for all my E-Revos. Just to let you guys know, for $271 in parts, I currently purchased the front and rear bulkhead, 2 of the plastic diff cups that you see here in the video, 2 sets of the spider gears, 2 of the pinion gears, and 4 of the 8684s, which is the center diff gear. What I realized by looking at it, you can do the MIP diffs with these. I'm going to use my current MIPs out of my V1. The only way I'm able to do so, because originally in this, it comes with a short one and a long one for the center drive line that comes out of the transmission. I noticed that since it comes with the shorter gear, if you look at the original 8mm 8683s, it's the same size, just has a different outlet like the original E-Revo does. Since I did the low C diff swap and currently have that, I know all about the stud axle modification you have to do. This is actually even better. Maybe some of you low C people might be able to do this. This is honestly the most expensive part of it in one piece than anything, because each of these are $25 a pack. It ends up being $100 just for the 4 of these, which is kind of a sad situation, kind of. At the same time, you still have to buy the bearings, which is the diff bearings, which are 2 different sizes that are roughly $5 for one set, $8 for another set, $8 for the other set, and then the dual pinion bearings is $4 for one and $6 for the other. And then I had to buy the skid plate for the V2. The skid plate from the V1 and the V2 is the exact same part number, so I'm gonna genuinely assume that it's the same. I'm gonna use my E-Revo 2.0 chassis that I originally tore off of the 2.0 in my very first video that I tore apart. Never really got a chance to use it, just used it for a couple mock-ups, and that's about it. But here we go. Well, for starters, you definitely need to sit there and get the gaskets in there. I'm going to be using my normal Mod 1 car grease instead of using any diff fluid. It's worked good for me in the V1, which is supposed to be even more of a failing diff. So if it works good enough for that, it should have no problem working for this. I know those of you that are gonna be mad about the fact that I'm going this way to go through all this painstaking effort to get this thing going, to not even use the right fluid, but this is what I like. Most guys, that from what I understand from the Revo 2.0 group, have tried a couple different kinds. I believe stock is either 40, 50, or 60. Natural, I'd go with probably the heavier one, just to make the diff lock a little bit more. It might be a little bit more strain on the diff, but honestly I'm not really too concerned, considering I've only seen very few, if any, diff issues. Mainly I think it's probably bearing failure and crashes more than anything, from my understanding. Mind you, this is going to be the first time I'm going to have to assemble this without it being greased, holding in place, and sitting here holding a cell phone. Well, dangling a cell phone, shall I say. Sorry, it's a little bit off camera. And I did leave paper towels. Now, if you guys do use regular diff fluid, I do recommend doing this part and filling it and then turning the gears a little bit to make sure everything works out appropriately like you want it to. You don't want to leave no air bubbles in there in any way, shape, or form with the silicone fluid. Sorry, I do definitely put a good liberal amount of grease here on everything all the time. I'm not really too concerned about this grease bleeding out like you would the silicone and having bubbles, because this doesn't react the same as your silicone would. I will in a later video be using 500 possibly in these. This is just a test fit. One of the key things is you're definitely going to need these diff cup screws. Mine are going to look a little bit different. I already had stainless from a previous kit. I would highly recommend stainless, just because it doesn't strip out as easy as the regular black oxided ones. Okay, sorry there. Ended up learning the hard way with this thicker grease. Had a hard time doing the crossbars because of the indent for them to actually cross. You definitely want to make sure the cup seats flush with the indents holding down the little brackets to hold them down in place from the 4 little spots that are actually on it that push it down in place. If it doesn't clear, that crossbar is not right. I'm a big fan of making sure you get every single one of the screws partially started before you do anything. Completely tight on anything. I don't ever recommend technically doing what I'm about to do here, but I'm doing this to speed up the process. And I'm not going all the way tight. Now what I like to do to test any diff I ever do, I'm not a bit concerned about the excess grease. I want grease on the teeth regardless. Does make it a sloppy mess though. I'm going to set this over here, out of the way. Time for the second one. Honestly, I'm going to pause at this point while I do the second one just to save video time. But once again, like I said before, make sure you put the gasket at least on there, or you could seat the gasket like I will on the pinion in advance. This way you know it's sitting right. Always make sure everything's sitting right. What I'll do on the pinion is what I should have done on the other side of that. Just make sure you force it in there. It's nice, good, and even around. It can twist, but one of the nice things about it, you could grab one of the axles, force it in there, kind of straighten it out. And the weird ripple, or not, apparently. It's about as straight as it's gonna get. I kind of like getting a little bit of grease from your greasy fingers on the gaskets as well, just to kind of lube everything up in advance. But I'm about to pause at this point and assemble the other diff. Alright, now with that done and out of the way, and both being functioning and screwed around, time to get the bulkheads prepped and ready. Got the screws to both here waiting. Going to lube these up as well. This, regardless, I'd use this on it anyways. Make sure I get it in all the little pockets as best as I can. Grease the heck out of it. I did this definitely on my original V2. Some people weren't exactly a big fan of it. I genuinely don't care if you're a fan or not. I don't do this to please people. I do this as an instructional thing and for my builds. It's all about my builds. It's not about yours. Sorry if I seem hasty or whatever, but I've definitely got a lot of criticism in the past on previous videos over time. Not to sound bitter, but it does get annoying, and I apologize for that. But this is definitely, this is definitely a must-do. I like to keep greasing, touching just about every surface you possibly can on the inside of the diff or the bulkhead case, on both the front and the rear. Now don't use too much to the point where it's like caked on there, but definitely hit all the like bearing race surfaces that you possibly can get to. A lot of it's going to end up sloshing around anyways. But with this bulkhead being plastic and not being aluminum, I'm generally not a big fan. But I have seen the diffs break, and the bulkheads still not exactly break from really rough front end collisions, cracked teeth, broken pinion shafts from just either whether it's a manufacturing process issue or not. Traxxas will definitely take care of you. From my experience, I've seen more than enough, probably more than most. Very well aware, being a moderator and a big supporter of the Revo 2.0. And a big fan, don't get me wrong. Alright, now that all nice and lubed up, I'm going to grab the diff bearings. Just to make sure match up the right sides. There's a larger one and a smaller one. Smaller diameter one. They both had the same insides. A little excess grease. I even like to grease this up a little bit. Always put your bearings and everything on first before you start adding the shims. The stock from Traxxas or whoever you purchase. I purchased a good vast majority of my stuff on eBay. Almost always put your shims on this side to force the diff more into the pinion gear. I do notice there's some slop in it. I'm going to lube up the pinion gear real quick. One second, let me get another paper towel. I'm gonna pause it. Okay. Same situation. Oops. Same situation. Make sure you get grease in every part of the pinion you can. All the way around. Get everything prepped. The larger bearing goes on the inside on first. Then the smaller bearing. this point I still do the usual little hand test. Now that everything's kind of pressed down, check for slop. See if you can slide it back and forth. Very, very faintly. I'm going to leave the shims out. I'm not really too concerned about it. My first one, my original e-Revo, didn't really have any shims. And I notice over time it's just going to get sloppier and sloppier as you wear it, the plastic. So I'll save those shims for, well, these two shims for a rainy day, unless the second one comes out a lot sloppier. This being the rear, it's going to have this funny triangular piece right here. Like I've said in previous video, where I tear apart the bulkheads, I always start with the center and work my way out. Never really tighten everything down at first. Just kind of get the screws started. But definitely when you get your first tightness all the way down to the point where you're going to actually snug it up hand tight, I highly recommend doing the center first. Just a good rule of thumb, especially when dealing with anything that's 4 or more screws. And if you are going to use a power screwdriver or impact screwdriver or drill for that matter, don't go all the way down. I don't care how much you have the clutch completely backed off. It's not going to do you no favors. Make sure you always hand tighten. You want to over tighten and strip out plastic threads and have to get a whole new bulkhead and start the whole process over with. All over again. Don't get me wrong, these new bulkheads are definitely a different type of plastic. The Anthrax this is used in the original e-Revo. Definitely a newer, stronger plastic, considering it's surviving what it has, and I haven't honestly seen any broken bulkheads. They weren't something ridiculous like a 30-foot something jump hitting nose first into a driveway from somebody jumping over the garage. But quick test with that like that. I stick the wrench in there. Actually make sure I move it around a little bit. Make sure the other side goes. All is well. I'm going to do the other side. Pretty much the same way. I'm going to get a little bit of extra grease. Touch all my surfaces again. Of course, there's actually still some extra grease there to begin with. I like getting a little bit of extra grease, even though these bearings are pre-greased and high quality from Jim's bearings, I always like to get a little bit of extra excess grease on everything that I can. There's your one in front. Skinnier one with smaller outer diameter and back on the plastic, which is always the fun one. Appears this diff has way more slop in it than the other one. I will use one of the bearings. I think the same thing with the other Revo 2.0 that I had straight out the box. One diff was sloppier than the other. I put in between the bearing and the front, even though I don't think that's doing any yeah, it's doing perfectly fine. Alright, that being said, in there, time to get the other pinion going. Same situation, get your greasy fingers all over it. The larger one of the two goes on first, and your smaller one oops, forgot to grease the pinion entirely. Into the thing of grease. Alright, I personally don't feel that that's enough grease really in there. So I'm going to throw a rather heavy amount inside of there now. Before I seal this thing completely up. This is the front diff that had the little bit more slop in it than the rear, for whatever reason. Both come with all their screws, so you don't need no extra screws to put the bulkheads together. Same situation as before. Put all screws in by hand. First. Start from the inside out. Let me fix the camera. Sorry about that, the camera fell. Alright, like I said, did on the other one, give a little bit of turn. Everything's fine. Set both of those off to the side. Now the key thing is as people were wondering, now you have the axle on the ends for an MIP, which here's an MIP, that has no problem fitting over this like the V1. So in all honesty, here's now the new bulkhead for the V2. I'm going to be running the center MIP drive shaft, all MIP drive shafts all the way around. Sorry I won't have enough time. I'm not going to be able to do a video to assemble this thing, even though I probably could do it in another hour. But this is my tier 1 budget build for my V1 to V2 swap. The disc fully assembled. Like I said, the parts list, it's kind of a scribble right here where you have your front bulkhead, which is roughly about $16, rear bulkhead, which is $16. You're going to need 2 plastic diff cups, which is $6 a piece, so it equals up to $12. You're going to need 2 of the spider gear sets, which is $10 a piece, which will equal $20. You'll need 2 of the pinion gear sets, which is $20 a piece, which adds up to $40. 4 of the 8684, which is those center diff output drives, which you can still use the MIPs with for the cheapest conversion. Just to give you an idea, you naturally only really need 1 of those, but I believe for the 8683 that you're originally going to use, the key reason why I'm not using that with my particular build is this 8mm drive is forcing you to use the newer cups, then the newer dog bones, and then